Hello, Dr. Anderson, Frankie said as she set her purse down and took her usual seat in the chair in front of him. How have you been? I've been great, Frankie. Thank you for asking. You're 10 minutes early. We weren't supposed to meet until 11 a.m., Anderson responded kindly. Yeah, my brother's planning this thing for my birthday, and I have a few things to get out of the way. She rolled her eyes and grinned, adjusting her jacket and getting more comfortable. Yeah. Oh, happy birthday, Frankie. 18 today, right? Again, she rolled her eyes and smiled quite broadly. Yeah, she replied. Anderson couldn't help but notice that she kept favoring her right arm, a tell of hers that she had several times since she was about 13 years old. Can I see your arm, Frankie, please? He asked gently. Her smile disappeared and she suddenly couldn't look him in the eye. She focused on the table in front of her and crossed her leg over her knee, swinging it back and forth to distract herself from the unpleasant subject. I'm fine. Really, Frankie. We've gone over this before. Cutting yourself is just a mask to cover underlying pain. It's not even a good mask. You're scarring yourself mercilessly and for no good reason. It helps me think about something else, she responded. She still wouldn't look at him. May I please see it? Anderson asked again. She sighed and hesitated, before removing her jacket and rolling up her sleeve. Dozens of scars revealed themselves, several at a time, as the sleeve receded until a fresh wound appeared. Not as deep as most of the others she had done, but bad enough that, like the others, it needed stitches. And like the others, she probably wouldn't get them. She held her wrist and turned her arm gently, looking over the recent and previous damage. Frankie, I know you have to understand the long-term consequences of doing this to yourself, he said as he released her. Yeah, I do, but nothing else makes me feel better, and you know what I go through every day. We've been over this 1,000,000 times, she replied. So it hasn't gotten any better. You still see and hear the darklings. But there must be other avenues, Frankie. You don't have to do this to yourself. Have you thought any more about admitting yourself into a psychiatric institution? There are some very good treatments available for visual and auditory hallucinations. She cut him off right there. I don't know how many times I have to say it, doctor. They are not hallucinations. It's real. It's as real to me as the chair you're sitting in is to you. I don't make any of it up for attention. I don't even want the attention it's brought me. I don't want these things in my life. Please don't coddle me. Don't make me think that I'm crazy when I'm not. And stop trying to make me think that there's something, anything in this godforsaken world that will make it all go away. She was serious and becoming irritated with him. Then why do you keep showing up here every week, Frankie? He asked, genuinely curious. Because, Dr. Anderson, you are the only one that has ever listened to any of my problems. You're the only friend I've ever had, and I like seeing you. She smiled. Anderson grinned and raked his hand through his white, receding hair. Now I've got to get going. She rolled down her sleeve, slipped on her jacket, and picked up her purse. I have a few things I have to do. I'll see you next week, she told him as she stepped out. Have a nice day, Frankie. And be careful, he said as he waved behind her back. After the door closed, he stood up, shaking his head and scratching at his salt and pepper beard. He heaved a deep sigh, wondering if she would be all right, knowing that even after all these years, she was still trying to find some way of coping with her problems, and even her weekly therapy wasn't a complete success. She was still haunted, but by what? It was still a mystery. Dane was waiting outside in a car, a metallic mint green Chrysler, brand new condition even though it was about 4 years old. Dane took impeccable care of his cars, and he sat there listening to the stereo and sporting the most ridiculous pair of sunglasses that she had ever seen. Of course, that was probably the point in wearing them, to make her laugh. Dane would have looked like a mix between Vin Diesel and Brandon Lee if it weren't for that bright blue highlight in his pitch-black hair. He was shorter than most men, about 5'8", and weighed nearly 200 pounds thanks to a bench-pressing fetish that he'd been nursing since he was 16. Dane was what most referred to as a punk of sorts. But despite the rebellious appearance, he had a very successful full-time job in real estate that, if he worked hard enough, would turn into a very lucrative career. Most women would consider him quite the catch, if it weren't for those damn twirling pinwheel sunglasses, and no matter how hard she tried not to. Of course she laughed. She slapped him on the back of the head on her way around to the passenger side of the car, gingerly opened the door and sat down. "You're such a dork," she said, matter-of-factly, not even looking at him as she said it. "Yeah? But you laughed. So, what does that make you?" he replied, spinning the pinwheels on his sunglasses and poking his tongue out at her. She laughed again as he started the car, still wearing those damn glasses. "On to the grocery store, then?" he asked, as they rounded the corner on 29th Street. "Yeah," she replied, seemingly more focused on the pedestrians outside than she was on his question. She swallowed hard and closed her eyes tight, pinching her pretty face into a distorted version of what it was supposed to be. Her hands began to shake as she closed her eyes tighter and tighter. Dane pulled the car over as quickly as he could, and knowing what was happening, reached into her purse and pulled out a near-empty bottle of Valium and opened it in a hurry. "Come on, sis. Take these." He spilled 2 pills into her shaking hands and guided it to her mouth. She nodded and took them, stealing a drink of his half-empty bottle of Pepsi to swallow them. "Just let those work, okay? Let them kick in. They'll go away. It's gonna be fine, Frankie." He comforted her with a gentle tone, and a hand rubbed her back. She wanted to believe that. She really did. "They never do, Dane. They never go away. Why is this happening to me?" She threw her hands up to her face and began sobbing, doing all she could to avoid looking outside. All she would see are the twisted faces of what were supposed to be human beings, but melted and distorted, charred versions of them. Skin dripped off them in chunks, and crooked black holes where mouths would be, opening up in twisted caverns to scream at her. They were just fractions of the horror that she would face every day, and she grew more frightened of it every time she saw it, but it would be different things each time. Sometimes it was this, what she was seeing right now. Other times, much, much worse. Faces that would climb out of her walls like insects, wearing horrific expressions that only violent death could bring. Sometimes what could only be described as ghosts. Gaping wounds and rotting bodies visiting her at all hours with no reason. Sometimes she would wake up to something tearing at her clothes and flesh, and she would have to explain it all away by saying she cut herself. She never had a day of peace, and how she longed for one. But the worst of all of them were the Darklings, hideous wraith-like creatures that moved in a series of random twitches and jerks in a manner far faster than the human body, tall and thin with mere threads of hair stringing from their bulbous heads, eyes round and beady, bulging from what should be sockets, but instead a hollow mass of darkness beneath their grayish, leather-like skin, riddled with rotting patches. Frightening faces that glare their warning, hissing whispers that tell of things no human should know, or would ever want to know. She's seen these things since she could remember. They've sworn to her that they would never leave. Any of them. Ever. But why? What reason could they possibly have to haunt her? She was just a meaningless person. She was no use to them. How could she be? "Frankie." Dane's voice broke her train of thought. "Frankie, are you going to be okay? Do you need to go home and lie down or something?" He sounded so concerned for her. In fact, it seemed every time he was around her during one of these episodes, he always worried about her, ever since they were children. "I'll be fine, Dane. It's going away now," she lied. She wiped a lock of hair from her face and sat up straight, still trying to avoid looking out the window, but trying to hide it as best as she could. The grocery store was pleasantly free of more than a handful of people. It was only a bit after 2 p.m., and most folks were still at work now, only just beginning to worry about what was for dinner. All she had to pick up was a bag of La Choy chow mein noodles, a can of chopped pineapple, and 4 large, boneless, skinless chicken breasts. Her brother must have Chinese in mind for her birthday dinner. Not a bad idea. She loved Chinese food almost as much as she loved Italian food. Her favorite Italian dish had to have been stuffed shells and marinara sauce, something about a medley of cheese that she just adored. She was getting tired and just wanted to lie down, but her brother had plans for her 18th birthday, and she didn't want to disappoint him. It was difficult for her to believe, but she had actually procured a small studio apartment in the Upper South Hill and was moving out of her brother's place in less than a week. She was surprised because she never thought that she would be brave enough to venture out on her own with all the problems that she has. To be honest, she was pretty proud of herself, terrified and proud. In a way, she didn't want to go, but she had to see if she could do it. Even if it didn't last, she wanted to be able to say she had at least tried. "You about ready, sis?" Dane asked as they casually strolled to the aisle containing candy and chips. This was where she wanted to be right now, looking for chocolate. The Hershey's Symphony with toffee seemed to sing its way into her hand, and she said, Yeah, I am." A smile crossed her face so wide he thought the top of her head might fall off. He laughed, and they made their way to the register. 2 people in front, 3 behind. She was beginning to feel uncomfortable being closed in that way. She took a deep breath, tried to shake it off. The cashier was friendly and courteous, making general conversation with Dane like most women did. Her hands began to shake again. She hated this feeling. Always when something was close by, she began to hear the whispers. Random voices hissing random words molding into sentences that made no sense to her. She began to panic. The cashier noticed it first. She asked if Frankie was okay, if she needed to sit down is all. But when Frankie looked up at her and saw the young woman's smile, her pretty face was transformed into something inhuman. Her eyes became hollow and evil, her mouth twisted into some sickening smile that one might find on a demon, and her nose completely disappeared, leaving 2 flat hollows. The threads of blackened skin seemed to wind over it all, completing it somehow. And of course, she would make a complete fool of herself in front of an entire grocery store by screaming bloody murder and hitting the poor woman. The whispers and hisses in her head grew louder, blaring in her mind like speakers on full volume, bass included. Trying to run was a mistake. Her head was pounding so hard that she only made it a few yards before stopping altogether. Her nose began to bleed. She could hear muddled voices behind her screaming, "Call 911. Ma'am, are you okay? Frankie, come on. Talk to me, baby." Then blackness. Quiet. Sleep. Thank God Dane had already paid for her candy bar.